Welcome back to part two of my Wolverine drawing. So if you haven't seen the first part, I highly suggest you check that out first. So in part one is pretty much just trying to decide what to draw and coming about the pose of the character. And it was just me pretty much fleshing out the pencil drawing. And I kind of knew ahead of time that with this drawing specifically, I wanted to up the quality of my work in terms of the YouTube drawings. I want my stuff to look cleaner and more, I guess, kind of really show, especially with this drawing, this is what my normal art style kind of looks like. With most of my YouTube videos, they're more about just like trying to create a video within a certain allotted amount of time. But for this Wolverine one, I kind of really want to create a definitive Wolverine piece for me. I really wanted this. I didn't want to be hurried through it or rushed through it. I really wanted the art style to be reflective of how I normally draw. So that's why this is going to be spread up, maybe over 2 or 3 parts. So as we enter the second part, this is more about me just trying to begin the inking phase of the drawing, and you never know, maybe within this hour or so I might actually be able to finish it. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't want to hurry this process. I wanted this to be a little bit slower, a little bit more thought out. So yeah, we'll get started with that. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, and I know I want to actually begin the finishes and render it out so that it looks more complete. I got to figure out the light source for this drawing, and I'm kind of, I don't want to cast them in too much shadow, but we'll see as I go along. I was kind of thinking maybe of lighting them from both corners. I kind of want to avoid lighting them from underneath, and I kind of want to avoid lighting them up from head on. So for now, I'm thinking that maybe I'll establish the light source as being coming from the upper corners of the page, and then I'll try to figure out the shadows as I start inking it. I don't always necessarily plan out the shadows in the pencil phase. For me, it's kind of the enjoyment of when I ink the drawing is when I'll figure that stuff out. Okay, so let's begin this drawing and see where it takes us. Now, as I look at this drawing, I'm also kind of breaking it down into layers, trying to figure out where the foreground is. I mean, it's just one figure right now. There's not necessarily a background, but in terms of the character, I'm trying to break them down into separate layers, like which part of his anatomy and body is more coming closer to me, which is further in the background, just so I can create some sense of separation. I don't want this drawing to look flat. Like, I want to make sure that this hand and claw that's coming at you feels like it's, actually not necessarily coming at you, but it exists on a slightly higher plane than his head, and then his body kind of falls further back. And you have this knee here that's kind of pushed more towards the front. So as I start inking it, I'm going to start planning that stage of the drawing also. Now, since I don't draw very tight pencils, when I ink over my drawings, there's a lot of guesswork in terms of, where I'm going to ink my lines, because I don't have a direct, clean line here that's really definitive. So for me, my pencil lines are more so an approximation of where things should go, and then when I ink it, that's kind of like, for me, kind of finalizing, okay, this is where this is going to exist. Now, I see the knee coming a lot closer to me and this arm than the rest of the body. So I want to try to separate this and put this on a higher plane, and I'm going to do that by giving this a thicker line weight than the rest of the drawing. years ago when I was at a comic book convention. I want to say it was Wizard World Chicago, maybe 2002 or 2003, I think. I met Eric Larson. He's the creator of Savage Dragon, that's published by Image Comics, and he had a very memorable and long run on Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man from Marvel. I met him at Wizard World. I mean, I met him prior to that also, but I saw him at a Wizard World one year in the early 2000, and I was trying to get work from comic book publishers, and I just go around to, and if they were professional artists I really liked, I'd show my work just to get some feedback on it. And I remember showing him some of my stuff, and I was kind of being experimental at the time, and I was messing around with stuff like these heavier line weights and some digital coloring. And when I showed him my work, I just remember him being so kind of surprised, but like in a good way though. And he was really curious for me to like show my work to other publishers and see what they thought, because some of the stuff I was doing, not that it was groundbreaking by any means, but it was just kind of unique and a little bit different. And it's kind of a break from the norm. And with some of my inking stuff, he was kind of intrigued by it. And I saw that as a good thing, because I didn't want to be a guy who just kind of mimicked or emulated other people's art styles. Granted, growing up and even to this day, there's many artists that I kind of looked up to, and when I was younger, I'd borrow bits and pieces of their style here and there. But I think for the most part, I've kind of defined my own style over the years, and it was a long process. It's not perfect. It's always going to be a work in progress. But I mean, with where I'm at, it's always nice to know that sometimes when I show people my work, like especially friends who've seen my stuff for such a long time, they'll always tell me that there's a certain quality to my art where it's almost like a signature. That I drew it, and I think that's kind of cool. It's not like I'm trying to be someone else or mimicking someone else's artwork. But when you're younger and you're growing up and you're following all these different comic book artists, it's very easy, and I think it's important to like, find stuff that you like and try to apply it for yourself, and get an understanding of it. And then I think as you carry along, or through an organic process, I think you kind of develop your own style. But I think you kind of do need those building blocks, and I think that like comes along from kind of like just mimicking what you see. So since this is going to be possibly more than, ideally I'd like to see if I could finish this drawing all in this second part, but I don't really want to rush it. I want to make sure I get everything drawn, not perfect, but this nice and clean, and just more indicative of my natural art style. Like when I first started doing the YouTube videos, it was fun doing the drawing videos, because it was kind of like a challenge for me just to see if I could pull things off. If I could do a video in a certain lot amount of time. And now that kind of thrill's kind of gone, right now it's more about me just refining my work for these videos and producing something that this looks like something I'd draw normally. And I don't want people to think that my art style is always this fast and kind of messy, so I really want this piece to be reflective of like, okay, this is how I normally draw on a normal day. The inking phase of the drawing is definitely my favorite part. This is a chance for me to really bring the drawing to life, and give it some sort of finality in the way it's going to look, and how it's going to be stylized. Not always, but I could sometimes kind of see the drawing in my head. I know some people, I think, have a better grasp on that kind of thing, but I don't really always see it until I start getting into this part of the drawing. One thing I have to be careful of too is that as I'm inking this drawing, I don't want to lose any of that kind of energy and dynamism that you have early on. Like when you're drawing in pencil, since these lines are so fast and so rough, there's a certain amount of energy in it. But then once you start drawing these much more well-defined lines, you can easily just like lose that energy. I got to make sure that I kind of maintain that kind of excitement in the line. And there's different ways of doing that. I think it's this, after doing it for so long, you just sometimes this kind of comes naturally and it just works itself out. So on the top of Wolverine's boots, he has these kind of like wings that kind of like pop out of the top of the cuffs and go above his knee line, and that's what I'm rendering out right here. Okay, there's that. What comes next? I really want to do these claws next. That's one thing I kind of want to get my mitts into right now. Okay, I could kind of let out a sigh of relief. So the whole time I was inking the claws, I was kind of holding my breath because this was like the crucial part, because these aren't straight lines and they're these kind of like gradual curves. And since my pencil lines were kind of rough to begin with, it's like I'm inking it and it's a commitment, and I had to make sure I got it right. So I was kind of like, I wasn't shaking or anything, but it's like I just had to hold my breath because I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this right. But they came out okay, so And I'm going to ink those little kind of metal sheaths on the top of his knuckles. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So for me right now, this is the kind of, not, I don't want to say a nervous stage, but I just have to make sure that all these lines around this area come out correctly. Because, I mean, if I mess up something around here in the hand or the arm here or in the waist or torso, that's all right. But I'm working in a very critical area here because if I don't do this right, I might F up the face or, you know, and once that's kind of done, it's like, oh, there goes the drawing. Now, for me, drawing this Wolverine, like I think I described it also, it's like I want this to be the definitive image of Wolverine. I don't mean this is gonna be like the greatest Wolverine piece ever, but I mean in terms of like all the Wolverines I've produced, I want to do something that if I had to sum up Wolverine in one illustration, using my style, you know, I want this to be the best representation of Wolverine that me personally, can do. And it's right now as I'm inking this, it's like there's so many questions about like how am I going to approach certain things, because I know in my head there's a certain amount of like detail I want to have, but at the same time I don't want to sacrifice the image quality. Like I've done some Wolverine drawings in the past that were very kind of rough, and there are parts that were kind of very flawed, but they had such a strong energy to it that it really conveyed the character. And for something like this, I'm looking at it, I'm like, where do I want to, you know, do I want to get crazy in certain areas and add lots of black? Do I want to, like, you know, Wolverine's kind of a hairy character. Do I want to go nuts and just give him hair everywhere? You know, those are the kind of questions I'm kind of like asking myself as I'm drawing, because I really don't want to. I don't want to mess this up at all. And I'm just really content right now with this how the image is right now, and how it stands. And I think for me, it's doing a good job of just capturing that the ferocity of the character and the energy he has and the movement and his expression. Okay, so since the claws in this forearm are kind of coming at you, I want to give this a slightly heavier line weight, but not the same as the line weight here, because I want this to shoot out a little bit closer to you. So I think I'm gonna just give this a slightly thicker line weight, but not as thick as this one. And the challenge there is that I don't want to make it too thick, because if I do, it starts cutting into the face, and I don't want to lose any of the, whatever real estate I have on the face. Okay, that's looking okay. Alright, let's get to his claws, and I don't want to mess this up either. Now this is one drawing that I know that I kind of want to pull back a little and not get carried away. For example, there was that Spider-Man drawing I did a month ago, and even in the video there's a certain point where I'm telling myself is that I gotta stop. I can't stop inking it, and then I just keep on adding more and more lines. So this one, I want to make it detailed. I want to give it a lot of intricate line work, but at the same time there's a part of me that just knows that I gotta figure out the balance and know when to pull back and say this is enough. Because I love the inking process so much that I enjoy this phase of the drawing when I'm just inking it and really giving it depth and life. And it's so easy for me to get carried away sometimes. Okay. I also want to kind of leave some breathing room in this drawing, because there's a part of me that I'm kind of really considering scanning this in it once I get this drawing completed and maybe trying to color it digitally. And maybe following this video too, I might actually go back, as I've mentioned before, and maybe retackle some of the previous drawings I did. Like there's the Venom, there was the Darth Vader, the Skeletor, the Spider-Man, and go back to those drawings and not necessarily recreate them, but just take those characters and that subject material and illustrate it in a way that's kind of like this, where it's a little bit more indicative of how I'd normally draw than versus a fast YouTube speed drawing. And if I don't pull this one off, right this time, I can always go back and try drawing Wolverine again for a third time. Okay, I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. Let's play around with some of the line weight here, where the contour lines are. Drawing can be a very slow process for me sometimes. I can work really fast, but at the same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I could just work at a snail's pace. I find drawing to be very therapeutic also. I don't know, there's almost like a very meditative kind of quality to it. If you get lost in creating the artwork, time kind of stands still and it's just dictated by your own pace. And I enjoy that aspect of, at least for me, when I create art. It's kind of an escape, and it's a good way of also, just getting my thoughts together. I'm really glad I didn't have a cup of coffee this morning, or I'd have like the shakes and I'd be all jittery and from the caffeine, and I wouldn't be able to ink this without like, I don't know, with my hands is vibrating like crazy like that. I remember one time at work. It doesn't take a whole lot of caffeine to like get me all jolted up too. One time I had like a cup of coffee, and I might have had it like, I used to wake up super early in the morning, like at 3:30 a.m. And then I'd start my day with a workout, breakfast, and a cup of coffee. I'm drinking coffee like I had a cup of coffee maybe at 4 or 5 a.m. And then I was at work later on around 10 a.m. And then my coworker, she's like looking at me. She's like, "You had coffee this morning, didn't you?" And I'm like, I'm like, yeah, how could you tell? And she's like, your hand is like shaking. I guess it was. I mean, I don't know. I like it just takes a little bit of caffeine, and I get kind of like bouncy off the walls. And if I have like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, even at the start of the day, I might have difficulty falling asleep just because I'm so wired just from like a little bit of coffee. Okay, where am I? I lost where I was at. Right. Okay, so I work on the hand still. Let's start the glove. Okay, I got the glove drawn in. I'm not sure yet. I ran into this problem the first time I drew Wolverine. I'm not sure how I want to render out his flesh tones. Cause there's part of me that I want to, not that I want this drawing to look perfect, but it seems like the more I add to it, the higher the risk there is to make a mistake or to make something look not right. So I'm just going to try to pull back for now and not get carried away with all the details I kind of want to do in my head. But just to kind of be a little bit on the conservative side right now. And then once I get closer to the end, if there's stuff I could add later, I will. But for now, I just want to produce a very clean, vibrant drawing of the character. I want the details to come out and look really crisp. Inking Wolverine's claws, God, it makes me nervous like every time. And today is no exception. Just drawing these lines is like nerve-wracking. Okay, there. I'm done with his claws for now. Okay, let's start defining some of these muscle groups in his arms. I've said this before in other videos. I really love rendering characters that have like darker spots or like leather on their outfits. Anytime I get to add a lot of black to a drawing, that kind of excites me. I love just the thought of contrasts of black and white and having them stand out against each other and just establishing different values and tones. That's like one of my favorite parts of this drawing, especially working in black and white. I had an art teacher once tell me before that maybe I should try experimenting in work in color, but I always found black and white art just to be a lot more dramatic, a lot more powerful. I made sure that to pull out some couple of new Sharpies so I'm not working with a blunt tip. I love working with Sharpies. I think it requires a certain amount of control just because since these are markers, markers tend to bleed, and you have to. There's an art and science just like knowing how much pressure to apply with a Sharpie and knowing the kind of stock of paper you're working on, just to avoid the issues of the artwork coming out messy or the inkwork just bleeding everywhere. And Sharpies are great. I know some people like to use the micron pens and some drafting technical pens, which is fine and good. But I always like this being able to like work with tools that I could readily find anywhere if I needed to. Like if I ran out of these markers, I could just run to like a Walmart or Target and very easily replenish my supply. It's not like I'm being dependent on being able to make a run to like the art store or something. Okay, I'm liking the line work around here. It seems to be working for me so far. It's a little makes me kind of nervous because I want to make sure I can pull off giving this some sense of form and tone to it in the musculature. And at the same time, I want to make sure my ink lines, they're exciting to look at and they have very well-defined crispness to it. inking for me is like, I think, one of the most beautiful aspects of like comic book drawing. Sometimes I think it's going the way of the dinosaur, just because since so much artwork's done digitally, you have a lot of artists and pencilers where they're just inking the artwork themselves, in Photoshop or clip art or Manga Studio Pro or whatever software they're using. And then it kind of removes the middleman of having the inker, the one who back in the day would really be the one responsible for embellishing the artwork and taking the pencil line work and giving it definitive form and structure and style. And with this Photoshop and all these drawing programs and filters, you can easily emulate comic book inking, at the press of a button, or with the draw of a stylus. And it's cool, but in some ways it just makes me feel sad that inking at some point in time, it just might become like a lost art. I mean, you saw it with like airbrush artwork. I mean, airbrushing was so big in the 80s, and I think around when the 90s kind of came along and people were starting to be dependent on Photoshop and creating digital work, airbrushing just kind of just lost its place. And I'd really hate to see that happen with people that work in ink. I love ink. It's such a beautiful medium. Ideally, if I had time, I'd love to be able to do this and render it out with like a Crowco pen and a brush and India ink. But that's such a time suck. And I could kind of get similar, not exactly the same results, just working with a marker. I remember one of the prominent comic book artists who I believe inked in marker was Neil Adams, and he was really well known. Did Batman. I want to say it wasn't Swamp Thing. That was Bernie Wrightson. Oh yeah, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Neil Adams. He definitely placed his signature upon drawing those characters. And in his ink work, the way he embellished things and like just using marker was amazing. And then when I heard that, part of me was kind of like, I don't care what other people say, I'm going to work in marker. Neil Adams works in marker. And I think it's also because the archival quality, marker fades over time. I've never had that issue because a lot of my work and my pieces, I'm always good about, once I'm done with a piece, I'll put it away like in an archival sleeve and just keep it out of sunlight. And very rarely do I come back to a piece that I inked in marker and that the ink's fading. But, it happens. I've heard of it happening, to other artists. Now this is the part I always hate. Whenever I have like a clenched fist and have to like render it out and flesh it out and figure out where all the shadows are going to fall, and if I have to spot my blacks and figure out where the points of contrast are going to be, this always kind of makes me nervous also. Because as I mentioned before, I never really plan out my drawings thoroughly enough to know where certain lines are going to fall and where shadows are going to fall and this and that. And it's always a work in progress for me, and it's very organic, and I always run the risk of this messing things up. Knock on wood, I've never had to like go back and pull out like an opaque marker and correct something. when I was younger, all I wanted to do was draw comic books for a living. And after I graduated college, I was doing some comic book work. I was self-publishing and doing some work for some smaller companies. And it was weird because it was like, for me, that was my job, and I always kind of felt it's always weird in the sense that other people ask me what I do, and just because I wasn't employed by like a company and pulled in a steady paycheck, it I had a hard time. I mean, I had a hard time justifying it to other people, like, okay, this is what I do for a living and this is what I'm doing. And it's like, unless I was pulling a regular paycheck and had a 9 to 5 or something that was well defined, I don't think people really took me as seriously. And I think that's always going to be the challenge of an artist, is that people don't always seem to take you seriously in terms of your craft unless you're like employed by a company and doing the 9 to 5 and doing something that kind of remotely resembles something they can relate to. And it's not like I was working any less. My days were long. I'd start drawing and hitting the drafting table at as early as like 2 in the morning, working until 10, take a nap for an hour or two, and then get back at it. And for me, it was such a labor of love, and I get bummed out when I think that I couldn't make that into a career. At some point in time, when it wasn't happening, I just kind of tapped out, and I'm like, I just got to get a job, like a real job. And then I think that kind of didn't kill my passion for this kind of stuff, but it's just kind of like a buzzkill. You have these dreams, and then for them to just kind of die hard, it's just kind of a bummer. But in some ways, like doing this video, I kind of get the chance to relive, some of those favorite years of my life when I was being really creative. And I like to think hopefully one day I can revisit it and, maybe actually make it into a career. But with the way the world moves, it's so fast, and you gotta keep up with the trends, and just the way things are. And just the reality that comic books aren't what they used to be anymore. And people don't necessarily gravitate towards comic books to get their fill of superhero stories. I think, live action media like TVs and movies has really replaced that genre of storytelling. So you're never going to see that again. People depending on print books as their source of like enjoyment and escapism and their sense of fantasy, and that's what you got out of comic books. But there's this generation that are growing up where Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and the Avengers, their stories are defined by their exploits on the big screen and on TV. It's not like back in the day where if you wanted to follow a character like Ghost Rider or the X-Men, the only avenue you had was the comic books, and to a lesser extent maybe like cartoons. And it's really changed a lot. And it kind of makes me sad, but at the same time I'm grateful I got to grow up in the era that I did and experience the things I did in terms of pop culture and this medium of work. Okay, it's looking alright. It's not as crisp and defined in the fingers as I kind of saw it in my head, but I don't really know how I'm going to fix that. So I'll just like live with this for now. And if, I don't know, if something strikes me later, a way to like kind of refine this better is in his hands, I'll go back, but this kind of works. Okay, let's work a little bit on his torso and his waist area. Yeah, there's no way I'm gonna finish this rest of this drawing in just one sitting. I'm gonna have to like take a pause at some point soon and then come back with part 3. And I don't mind. I mean, this is what I kind of set out to do, is draw not necessarily the most perfect Wolverine, but a Wolverine that I could live with and say, wow, this is my definitive version of how I envision the character. But we're getting there. This is going to take a while. This is going to be a somewhat longer journey than I anticipated. So for his belt, I'm going for the very simplified version of Wolverine's belt that was given to him in the early 90s. It's a broad, thick strap of leather that just goes across his waist, and then there's just an X in it. I don't want to go in there and add a belt buckle or anything. I just want to keep the design a little bit more streamlined, and I kind of like that version of his belt. Okay, this is where I kind of want to. I don't want to mess this up. I think pull his belt in a little bit more than I initially drew. Okay, so I don't want to mess this belt up because there's gonna be an X drawn across it, and make sure I at least get this right. I don't want to get the X all. I don't want to mar the drawing by just goofing up on drawing a simple X. So I'm gonna pull out the ruler here and kind of define the line a little bit better, just so I know what I'm doing. All right, the point up here. I'm not sure if that's right, but I might just go with it. Alright, let's go with it. Okay, so I think so X marks the spot for that. So I'm gonna wrap up at least this part of the drawing video for now. You know, be on the lookout for part 3. You know, I kind of knew going into this I wasn't gonna finish. Ideally I would have liked to finish a lot more, but I think this we're gonna leave off for now. I don't want to hurry it. I'm really liking where everything's going in the direction and the feel of it. The lines look crisp. It hasn't lost any of that dynamism or energy that the character is supposed to convey. So yeah, this is the end of drawing Wolverine. Again, part 2. Be on the lookout for part 3. That'll come along soon. So thanks for checking this out, and take care.